Welcome to the 700 Club. U.S. and Russian officials are meeting in Switzerland this morning, hoping to lower the temperature in Eastern Europe. Russia has 100,000 troops on the border with Ukraine, fueling fears of an invasion.
The United States is threatening massive consequences if Russia doesn't back down. Dale Hurd reports on the ongoing escalation.
The U.S. is reportedly ready to discuss a deal limiting future missile deployments in Ukraine and pulling back on NATO military exercises in Eastern Europe if Russia will back off on Ukraine. This as tens of thousands of Russian troops remain camped on Ukraine's border, ready to invade. But Secretary of State Antony Blinken, speaking Sunday, did not sound hopeful about achieving success in the talks, at least right away.
I don't think we're going to see any breakthroughs next week. We're going to listen to their concerns, they'll listen to our concerns, and we'll see if there are grounds for progress. But to make actual progress, it's very hard to see that happening when there's an ongoing escalation.
Russian President Vladimir Putin wants guarantees that Ukraine will not be allowed into NATO and that NATO will pull back from former Soviet states. Russian officials say former Secretary of State James Baker made this promise to them at the end of the Cold War. The U.S. says that's not true. Historically, Russia views Ukraine as a strategic buffer against invasion. Some say Putin also sees it as a key to reasserting Russia's global influence, if he can dominate it.
They're in a bit of a difficult position because the Russian demands are non-starters, right? And everyone on the Western side, on the NATO side, agrees that they're non-starters. And yet, here is Putin and Russia kind of with all the cards, with this massive troop buildup on the Ukrainian borders.
Blinken says the U.S. and NATO are prepared to punish Russia if it moves on Ukraine.
There will be massive consequences for Russia if it renews its aggression, economic, financial, and other consequences, as well as NATO almost certainly having to reinforce its positions on its eastern flank.
Anti-Russian protesters took to the streets of Ukraine's capital, Kiev, on Sunday, fearful that Putin may not be bluffing about an invasion.
We are afraid that Russia will attack Ukraine in the coming months. We all build this country, we love it, we believe in its future.
This is happening as Russia seeks to prop up another old Soviet state, sending troops to Kazakhstan to quell unrest after government forces opened fire and killed scores of protesters angry about rising fuel prices. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, CBN Chief International Correspondent Gary Lane joins us now. So, Gary, what do you make of the Russian claims that somehow or other there was a promise from the Secretary of State, Jim Baker? Was anything in writing on that?
No, I mean, as far as we know, there wasn't. But I wouldn't put it past Baker to have done that, to have said that to them. It could very well be true. Of course, the United States government is denying it. But, Gordon, the key here is Ukraine is very important to Russia and to Europe. Ukraine has long been, as Dale mentioned, this military buffer for invasion from Europe to Russia. So Putin sees it as that. But also, during the Soviet days, Ukraine was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. It provided wheat and other crops to feed the people of the USSR. And today it is now a place of energy. Russia is dependent on energy. About 60 to 70% of its exports come from energy. You can see these pipelines going right from Russia through Ukraine. Oil pipeline in the blue here, in the red are the gas pipelines. There are several of each going right through Ukraine. And then, of course, the latest one, the new one, is coming from northern Russia down into Germany. And that is a Nord Stream 2. And that is just about ready to go online, Gordon.
Well, so you're saying this is mostly economic, and in some instances, Russia is making a claim that this is somehow related to their security, the security of their borders?
Well, there is security. Look, economics is security, isn't it? Russia is hurting economically, and when you're dependent, nobody wants anything from Russia. What do they export? They basically export military hardware and energy. And right now, Europe is dependent on Russia for energy. Donald Trump warned them about that. He said, look, the U.S. can give you cheap energy. Now they're energy dependent on Russia. They will become more so, and Putin will have much leverage over the Europeans.
Well, let's go back to the treaties. For whatever it's worth, James Baker said he never made that promise. And the current Secretary of State is saying, going back to spheres of influence, the famous Potsdam Conference, and, there'll be spheres of influence where Russia gets control of Eastern Europe, the U.S. gets control of certain areas, Great Britain gets control of certain areas. All of that is old and should never be revisited. But there is a writing that Russia signed, and this is back when Ukraine gave up their nuclear stockpile. And at that point in time, Ukraine had the third largest nuclear stockpile in the world, which, by any account, that's enormous. And they gave it all up in return from a promise from Russia. And there were two promises in this Budapest memorandum. One is Russia would never threaten them economically, and then two, Russia would never threaten them militarily. Why isn't that front and center in this current discussion? Why is anyone listening to I got to call it for what I think it is, the gaslighting coming from Russia right now?
Well, again, Russia holds all the cards. When you are energy dependent on Russia, Putin can turn off the spigots at any time. Now, as far as that agreement goes, my understanding, it was not a treaty, it was a memorandum. So he's not bound by treaty. He's bound by a memorandum and by his word. You can't trust Putin. Former KGB agent, he's going to do what he believes is in the best interests of Russia, no one else. But we'll have to see, because there will be consequences economically, tough sanctions against Russia if he moves forward with an invasion. I don't think he'll do that. I think Putin's going to take it as far as he can and get as much as he can without doing that.
What do you think the U.S. is going to give so that an invasion is called off?
Probably the pullback of missiles, also agreement not to have military exercises near the Russian border. But as far as Ukraine is concerned, and, they may eventually say, no, we will not allow Ukraine to be a part of NATO. But basically, the position right now of the United States is what happens with Ukraine is up to the Ukrainians, not to the Russians.
All right. Thanks, Gary. Thanks for the insight. In other news, a controversial new voting law is now in effect in New York. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That is right, Gordon. The law allows non-U.S. citizens to vote in local elections in New York City. More than 800,000 people, including those authorized to work in the United States and those who've been lawful permanent residents for more than 30 days, can now cast their ballots. It also includes dreamers, the children of parents who came to the United States illegally. The law applies only to city elections, such as mayor, city council members, borough presidents, comptroller, and public advocates. Special ballots are being prepared to prevent voting in statewide and national contests. Investigators believe an electric space heater is the cause of a Sunday fire in New York City apartment building that took the lives of at least 19 people, including 9 children. The heater apparently setting fire to a mattress in one of the apartments. An open door let smoke spread through the 3-story building in the Bronx. More than 200 firefighters were on the scene, smashing windows and using ladders to save those trapped. Dozens were rescued, but one woman lost her entire family.
To see it in a mother's eyes as I held her, who lost her entire family. It's hard to fathom what they're going through. We will not forget you. We will not abandon you. We are here for you.
The governor plans to establish a compensation fund for the victims to help them secure housing. Well, both sides in the abortion battle are waiting on a critical ruling from the Supreme Court. If the justices overturn Roe v. Wade this term, some states are ready to ban the practice altogether. But California is going in the opposite direction, moving to be an abortion sanctuary. Senior national affairs correspondent Heather Sells reports.
California is already preparing for what could be a post-Roe America. Its new abortion council has released a guide that positions the state to rapidly increase the number of abortions performed and pay for them as well.
It's really a shocking document, and I think it shows that there is really just an absolute desperation on behalf of some in the abortion industry to do everything they can to thwart pro-life movement and pro-life states across the country.
If the Supreme Court were to overturn Roe, states would then be free to craft their own laws on the issue. California leaders believe their abortion-friendly climate would attract women from states choosing to ban the procedure. California is relying on predictions from the Guttmacher Institute and Abortion Advocate, which shows the number of women choosing California for abortions could jump from 46,000 to 1.4 million. That is close to a 3,000% spike.
We think that everyone should be able to access the care they need and make their own decisions about their family's future.
And the state may make that so-called care, including travel expenses, free to any woman who can't pay.
Gavin Newsom is actually talking about paying women with unplanned pregnancies to fly to the state of California, to pay for their hotel rooms, to cover all of their even work-related expenses if they have to take unpaid time off so that they can come here and end the lives of their unborn children.
It's all part of California's effort to become an abortion capital, or what supporters call a model for reproductive freedom.
I think California, as a value statement, wants to be that beacon, but we've got work to do.
The Abortion Council is also pushing back on religious liberty by calling for religiously affiliated hospitals to provide abortions. And it says the state must, quote, combat harmful and misleading information perpetuated by crisis pregnancy centers. One pregnancy center association, NIFLA, tells CBN News that's a false narrative. That's because the State Department of Health has granted medical licenses to its facilities that perform ultrasounds, plus its 2018 Supreme Court win that protected its free speech. California also wants better data on abortion, virtually ignoring that it's one of just 3 states refusing to provide its own abortion numbers to the CDC. Heather Sell, CBN News.
Thanks, Heather. Gordon, many expecting a complete reshaping of the landscape after this upcoming decision.
And that's been the prediction for some time, that if Roe versus Wade gets either reduced or reversed by the Supreme Court, it then falls back on the various states. And the various states will then have the ability to either have abortion sanctuaries, which clearly California is going to, or the so-called trigger laws that as soon as Roe versus Wade is reversed, those laws go on the books and are pretty much automatic. So abortions will have a patchwork, if you will, of different laws regarding it. But boy, California is taking it to a whole new level, where on the taxpayer in California, the state taxpayers will pay for the airfare and the lodging of women seeking abortions in the state. That's a whole nother level, and just shows you how deep the divide is, how deep the ideology is. I'm always amazed at how the pro-abortion crowd wants to take it to the moment of birth, the late-term abortions, all of this. It just makes no sense to me. Can we please have a culture of life? Can we please have a culture where we encourage women to give birth and to become mothers? Wouldn't that be a wonderful place? And when you start thinking about future generations, why are we killing off our future? It absolutely makes no sense to me. I don't understand it outside the spiritual, that who comes to seek and to kill and destroy. Can we please encourage people, women, to give us hope for the future and become mothers?